Welcome to Passage Attack. In this series of videos, we're going to attack smaller passages of Scripture and show you how to analyze those passages of Scripture and get the meaning so that you can not only understand but preach and teach from those. Today, in Passage Attack, our passage of Scripture is 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 through 9. Now, to introduce that passage, Peter was writing to the people in the provinces of Pontus and Asia and Bithynia and Cappadocia, and that was an area in which Christianity was brand new. Probably the key theological word in the book of 1 Peter is anastrophe, which means conduct, behavior, the way that you behave. And Peter's message throughout the entire book was, you're going to have to live and behave in front of these people in such a way that they lose their suspicions of you, that they stop being afraid of you, that they start realizing that you're good people and not something to be feared or to be stayed away from. So in the context of that big message of the book of 1 Peter, we have this little passage in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 4 through 9. It is a passage that takes some stone texts from the Old Testament, particularly Isaiah 28:16, Isaiah 8:14, and Psalm 118, verse 22. And it puts those together into a comparison of Jesus, the rock, Jesus, the stone, and how people treated Jesus, and we Christians and how people treat us. And so this is what's really going on in the passage. So first of all, as we look at this passage in today's passage attack, let's look at the idea of the stone in this passage. Starting at verse 4, he's talking about Jesus, and he says, "Come to him a living stone." See, there's our word stone. Then in verse 5, "You also like living stones." There's stones again. Drop down to verse 6 where he brings in Isaiah 28:16. "Behold, I am laying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone." See? Go down to verse 7 where he brings in Psalm 118. He says, "The stone which the builders rejected," the cornerstone. And then down in verse 8 where he brings in Isaiah 8:14, "a stone of stumbling, a rock of offense." It's obvious that stone and rock is the theme of this passage. Now, so what? What does that have to do with us? Well, in the book of 1 Peter, the way people treated Jesus and the way people are treating Christians in the provinces that Peter's writing to are the same. Look back up at verse 4. We're going to change our marker here so you can see clearly. Verse 4. He says, "As you come to him, a living stone rejected by men." Notice that. "But in the sight of God, chosen and precious." Notice men rejected Jesus, but in God's sight he was chosen and precious. "And we also are like living stones." You'll notice that Jesus was a living stone, and we are living stones in verse 5. But notice down here in verse 7, "the stone which the builders rejected." You'll notice that Jesus was rejected by men right down here. And we also, as Christians, are often rejected, see? But you'll notice that back up in verse 4, Jesus was chosen and precious. The word chosen is the word elect, eklektos in Greek. But if you look down here at verse 6, "Behold, I am laying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone, chosen and precious." See the chosen and precious there that goes back up to verse 4? And if you'll drop down to verse 9, he says, "You, Christians, are a chosen race." See, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. So like Jesus, we are chosen, see? Chosen and precious. So people may reject us, But in the sight of God, we are chosen and precious. And he wants the people there in those provinces that are suffering at the hands of their neighbors to realize that while we may be rejected by people like Jesus was, in God's sight, we are chosen and precious. Now, the last thing that Peter wants to point out about these stones is this. Jesus, our stone, can be one of two things for us. He can be a precious cornerstone, a foundation stone that we build our life on, or he can be a stumbling stone to us. You'll notice back up here in verse 6, God says from Isaiah 28:16, "Behold, I am laying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone chosen and precious. Whoever believes in him, whoever trusts in him, will not be put to shame." So if you trust in Jesus, he's your foundation stone. He's your cornerstone. And it doesn't matter that other people rejected him. If you look down in verse 7, he's become the cornerstone. You trust in him, he'll be your cornerstone. But if you look down to verse 8, he's also, to some people, a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. And the end of verse 8 says, they stumble because they disobey the word, as they were destined to do. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood. See this business about the priesthood. You can go back up here to verse 5, where he says, you yourselves like living stones are built up as a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood. And here you have down in verse 9, the royal priesthood. See, a holy nation. You have these connections that come here. So the passage is tied together in all of those ways. What's the meaning of the passage? The passage simply says this, that as they treated Jesus, so they might treat you. But as in the case of Jesus, he was in God's sight chosen and precious. And we are in God's sight chosen and precious, regardless of how people treat us. If you trust in Jesus and follow him, he'll be your foundation stone. If you disobey Jesus, he'll be your stumbling stone. That's our passage attack for today. Hope you enjoyed it. God bless you. Have a great week.